Some people judge a book before they've even opened the first page. For 3 years, my daughter-in-law's mother looked at me as if I were a temporary guest in a world where I didn't belong. She smiled when she had to. She was polite when others were watching. But there was always something behind her eyes that told a different story. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining it. Maybe it was cultural differences. Maybe she was naturally reserved. Maybe she simply needed time. But one dinner in Scottsdale changed everything. My name is Dorothy. I'm 63 years old, and for most of my life, I've learned how to survive quietly. When my husband passed away unexpectedly, my son Patrick was only 11 years old. Overnight, I became both mother and father. Money was tight. There were months when every dollar had a destination before it even reached my bank account. Yet no matter how difficult things became, I made sure Patrick never doubted one thing: he was loved. Every single day, I worked long hours. Years later, after Patrick left for college, I finally did something for myself. I enrolled in a Japanese language class. Most people thought it was strange. My sister laughed and called it a retirement crisis, but I didn't care. Something about the language fascinated me. What started as a simple class became an obsession. One lesson turned into hundreds. One textbook became an entire bookshelf. I attended language groups, practiced online, watched Japanese television, and spent years studying with a retired teacher living in Osaka. Little by little, the impossible became possible. I became fluent, not perfect, but fluent enough to understand every conversation around me. The funny thing was, including Patrick, to him, Japanese was just another one of Mom's hobbies. Nothing important, nothing remarkable. Then he met Yuki. She was intelligent, kind, and ambitious. I adored her immediately. Her parents, however, were another story. Kenji and Fumiko had built a successful import company and enjoyed a level of wealth I had never experienced. From our first meeting, I sensed their disappointment, not in Patrick. In me? To them, I was the widow from Ohio, the woman with the modest house, the mother without status, the parent who couldn't offer prestigious connections or impressive family history. Over time, I began hearing things. Small comments spoken in Japanese. Remarks they assumed I couldn't understand.
At first, they were subtle. Then they became harder to ignore. Fumiko referred to me as the widow. Kenji once suggested Patrick lacked proper family roots. Another time they discussed my home as if it were evidence of failure rather than a place where love had lived for decades. Every insult landed, but I never reacted. I simply listened and remembered. Then came the dinner. Patrick called one afternoon sounding excited. A Japanese developer was considering a major partnership involving luxury architectural imports. Kenji's company was involved. Patrick's real estate firm was involved. And surprisingly, I was invited too. Part of me hoped things were changing. Part of me wanted to believe that maybe Kenji and Fumiko were finally accepting me. The dinner took place at an upscale Scottsdale restaurant. Soft lighting, expensive wine, perfectly arranged plates. The kind of place where every detail whispers wealth. Everything seemed pleasant. Business discussions flowed naturally. English blended with Japanese. People laughed. Glasses clinked. Then Patrick stepped away to answer a phone call. And that's when everything happened. Kenji leaned toward the Japanese developer and began speaking in Japanese. His words were calm, almost casual, which somehow made them worse. He described Patrick as a good young man. Then he explained that Patrick came from a family with very little substance, very little weight, very little importance. Then he spoke about me. He called me simple, ordinary, unsophisticated, a woman who had nothing meaningful to contribute. According to him, Yuki deserved a husband whose family brought more value to the table. Fumiko agreed. She suggested that Patrick's upbringing had limited him, that people from backgrounds like mine rarely understood high-level business or elite social circles. I sat there listening, every word, every assumption, every judgment. For a moment, I felt hurt, not because strangers were criticizing me, but because after 3 years, I finally knew the truth. They had never misunderstood me. They had simply underestimated me. There is a difference, a very important difference. Patrick returned to the table. The conversation shifted. Everyone smiled. Everyone pretended. And I waited, because timing matters. Sometimes the strongest response isn't immediate. Sometimes the strongest response arrives when nobody expects it. Several minutes later, the conversation paused naturally. I set down my glass, turned toward the Japanese developer, and spoke flawless Japanese. The room froze. I still remember the exact expression on Kenji's face. Shock, pure shock. The developer blinked twice before smiling. Then he answered me in Japanese. We began talking, naturally, comfortably, like old friends. I told him about my years of study, about the language groups, about my teacher in Osaka, about my dream of visiting Japan someday. The conversation continued for nearly 10 minutes. The entire table watched, silent. The more I spoke, the smaller Kenji seemed to become, not because I was embarrassing him, because reality was correcting him. The developer eventually turned toward Kenji. Then he said something I will never forget. He said that the most valuable people are often those who invest years into something without expecting recognition. He said discipline, curiosity, and humility reveal far more about a person than wealth ever could. Then he looked directly at me and called me remarkable. For the first time all evening, nobody had anything to say. The dinner ended shortly afterward. Outside in the parking lot, Patrick walked me to my car. The Arizona sky stretched above us. He stopped beside my door and looked at me. Mom, he said softly, how long have you been speaking Japanese? Almost 10 years. His eyes widened. Then came the question I knew was coming. Did you understand everything they said tonight? I nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he wrapped his arms around me and said something I'll never forget. I'm sorry. I shook my head. You didn't say those things. He stood there silently, then smiled. The same smile he had when he was a little boy. The same smile that made every sacrifice worth it. A few weeks later, Patrick called again. The business deal was moving forward, but that wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part was that Kenji and Fumiko had changed. Suddenly, they treated me differently, more respectfully, more carefully, almost as if they were seeing me for the first time. Then came the biggest surprise. Fumiko wanted to meet me for lunch, just the two of us. Maybe it was an apology, maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was both. I haven't decided yet whether I'll accept, but I do know this. That dinner wasn't a victory. It wasn't revenge. And it wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about remembering who I was. For 10 years, I built something quietly. No audience, no applause, no recognition, just one lesson at a time. And when the moment arrived, all those quiet years spoke for themselves. Because the truth is this: people can underestimate your income. They can underestimate your background. They can underestimate your education. But when you spend years becoming a better version of yourself, eventually the world notices. And when that day comes, you won't need to defend yourself. Your actions will do the talking for you.